A fact is information without emotion. An opinion is information shaped by experience. Ignorance is an opinion without knowledge. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today revolves around the country's economy as well as energy security in the country. Will the next 6 months be crucial for the business sector in Sri Lanka, and how is it going to affect the business community at large? To discuss all this and more, we've invited 4 guests to our studio this evening. Let me quickly introduce them to you. Joining us this evening on the show are Murtaza Jafferjee, Chairman of the Advocata Institute; Vidhura Ralapanawe, Energy Analyst; Chanaka Wickramasuriya, Energy Consultant, as well as Asoka Abeygunawardana, Strategic Planner in terms of energy as well. To pose questions from our panelists this evening, on to my immediate right is Niresh Thambi, and on to my immediate left is Shihar Anis, independent journalist. You too can join in as far as the conversation is concerned. The number to send in your messages via WhatsApp is 076-656-5353. The number once again, 076-656-5353. To get some context to the topic that we're discussing today, let's start off the show tonight with Murtaza Jafferjee, Chairman of Advocata Institute. Murtaza, I want to go back to one of the statements that you made on the 18th of February 2025 with regard to the country's budget. You went on to say that there is a misperception of the government ideology given its roots. This is a market-oriented pro-business budget, but the devil is in the details. If the government can get implementation right, then in 1 year Sri Lanka will be in a better place. Last year, country's economic growth stood at 5.5%. Now the projected growth is standing approximately at 3.5%. Whatever you said in February is not making any sense now, is it? The time starts now.
So I disagree. So as an economist, there are four buckets that you look on an economy. So first you look at the external sector, how we are doing with our trade outside Sri Lanka. And over many years, Sri Lanka ran large current account deficits, which means that we had a savings investment gap, or in a very simple way that we were spending more than we were earning. We are posting current account surpluses. The reserve accumulation is way ahead of the central bank's target. And the Sri Lankan rupee is stable relative to the dollar, although recently with the stronger yen and Swiss franc and euro, it has depreciated. If you look at the fiscal sector, again, we are building on the good work that we did in 2024. The first 3 months fiscal statistics have come, and the statistics are coming more timely, so you can make proper judgments. We are doing pretty well. We are posting primary balance surpluses. One of the negative things is we have cut down on capital expenditure. The third dimension is the monetary sector. Inflation is well under control. In fact, it is in negative territory because of falling energy prices. Interest rates have come down significantly. There is a monetary policy announcement coming tomorrow. So on that merit, we are doing well. And the final one is what economists call the real sector, which is to do with economic growth. Now, last year, we grew at 5.5% because we had had such a deep contraction the previous years, especially the construction industry that contracted by 75%. So, the biggest contributor for the rebound last year was the construction industry, and then you had a very strong recovery in tourism, etc. So, the economy is actually in a good place. The question is that can we keep the growth momentum going? Because our last peak of growth was in 2018. At the end of 2024, we were still 5.5% below where we were in 2018. So this year is also a catch-up year. And unless we do the implementation that I talked about in February, the microeconomic reform to make the economy work differently, more competition, more market-oriented systems like electricity that we're going to talk about, I'm afraid the growth won't come. And if we don't get growth to 4.5%, 5% instead of the base case of 3%, I'm afraid we will have to restructure our debt again in 3 to 4 years.
Murtaza, now you said something very interesting in your opening remarks. You said that there has been some good effect as far as the country's economy is concerned. You said the spillover from 2024 has really affected the country's economy very positively.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you a very direct question. Who is responsible for the growth for the year 2024? Is it the Ranil Wickramasuriya administration or is it the Chanaka administration?
So there is a saying that failure is often, but when you do things right, there are many people taking credit. So definitely Ranil Wickramasuriya was the president, but there were many other actors, including the IMF, who put in some very tight conditionality. We were very fortuitous with the weather, fortuitous with the external environment, commodity prices went down. So there were many contributory factors. But if you are asking that it was the president who was the leader of the country, and he was also the finance minister, and he was principally involved in guiding policy and shaping policy.
Who is this? Is it
the president? No, yes, the previous president.
That's Ranil Wickramasuriya.
Yes.
So whatever benefits that we are reaping now as far as the country's economy is concerned is owing to Ranil Wickramasuriya's administration.
I didn't say that. I said that he was the president of the country, he was the leader of the country, he was also the finance minister. He was an important actor, but there were many other things that also fell into place, like legislation, like an independent central bank. You had the right kind of governor, the right kind of law that came into being. You had the right kind of person as a secretary to the Ministry of Finance. There were many other things that came into.
Why I'm asking this question, Murtaza, is many from the opposition quarters are saying that the government has not done anything for the last 6 months. So I'm trying to figure out and understand from you, who has been quite an actor as far as the country's economy is concerned, as to who is responsible. If there is credit due, who should be given that credit, and what must the government do in order to strengthen their belts in terms of moving forward?
So when the presidential election was held initially, leading up to it, take the stock market, there was a significant contraction in the market. So there was a fear that they will come into power, the NPP will come into power and do harm. They haven't done any harm because they haven't reversed any of the major legislation. Right? There is some talk about revision of the electricity law, but the question is, did they do a lot of new things? Right? They are relatively new in this game. Some of the legislation that needs to be done, that are what are called structural benchmarks in the IMF program, yet are work in progress. And I sincerely hope that during the course of this year, that a lot of those things are put into action.
Right. Murtaza, now you all said something very interesting in your opening remarks. You said falling energy prices also affected very positively as far as the country
on deflation.
On deflation.
Yeah.
So just to try to understand, the last few months, the Ceylon Electricity Board has incurred a loss of 18 billion, which is quite staggering. Last year making operating profit, and this year coming in an 18 billion loss. What's going on?
So that's to do with the price setting, right? So my understanding is that both the Electricity Board and the regulator forecast. It's a forward forecast of what prices are going to be. That is based on the generation mix. So you have to have a forecast of what the weather is going to do. You have to also have a forecast of what some of the input prices like fuel are going to do. And you have to have a forecast of also how much of energy demand is going to happen. So if you get a forecasting error and some of the input variables that go, you will get this kind of loss.
But what I'm trying to understand is why.
And also there is one further other thing which I forgot.
Yeah.
Because they made a large profit surplus last year, the way the regulator operates is you have to claw back some of that surplus from last year and give lower prices this year. So that is why in terms of accounting profit, you are seeing a loss.
So who is responsible for making the forecast wrong? It's not the public.
No,
sure.
you can't blame anybody because even I can't. I mean, forecast is a best estimate, right? You can get your forecast wrong. Maybe what you should really discuss in today's forum is whether this methodology that we use is the correct methodology that should be used, and I have very strong opinions that this is not the way we should do it.
Right. So I have a few questions for you, Murtaza, before I move to Vidhura, because for us to get some closure as to what your role has been over the last few years with the Ranil Wickramasuriya administration. So you were also a member of the SOE restructuring committee. Yeah. What's happening with that committee now?
Yeah, so I want to correct you that I didn't have any role in the administration.
But
I have been a committee member in many governments. Even in this government, I am a committee member in some committees that I was invited, and so many previous governments I have been committee members, but I was an active committee member in the SOE restructuring unit.
Right.
Yes.
So what's the progress of that thus far? Because CEB restructuring was also on the cards when you all were handling
I was not part of that. I was not part of that. I was only part of an entity that looked at the divestiture of 7 to 8 entities, including Sri Lanka Telecom and Sri Lankan Airlines. It was a long process. It took 2 years. There was a Rolls-Royce process, maybe too good, but we ran out of time. The environment was quite weak because we were still in default. The interest levels were quite low. And I must also say that the political will to do this started waning 6 to 9 months before the election because the president wanted to run. So his enthusiasm also to carry through this and the political will to push through, I detected it was waning.
Right. So Murtaza, one final question before I move to Vidhura, again to get some closure with regard to your role. Now you said that the political will was waning, but all this came at a good cost. Why? Because on the 17th of May 2024, which was a Friday, on Thursday you went on to say that there are questions with regard to the government paying 0.0826 per unit of electricity for untendered project when going rate is less than 0.06 US dollars. This was on the Adani project. The government comes into play, they stop the Adani project. At the end of the day, do you think the Sri Lankan people have won?
Undoubtedly. It was one of the most outrageous transactions that could have been ever done for the simple reason as this. You know, sometimes a country is unlucky, sometimes a country is lucky. Our luck is geography, right? We are in a fabulous location in terms of maritime routes, which we should have exploited to our benefit. We didn't. We, for example, gave the West Terminal without competitive bidding. Take this Mana project basically. It is one of the best regions in the tropics which are low wind regime for wind. We should have had global tenders and offered it to a highly competitive price. Under the guise of government to government, Adani is not a government entity. It is a violation of our own procurement law that we were trying to give an unsolicited project to one businessman without enforcing competitive tenders, which according to the new law is now, because our old law did not allow unsolicited. They just changed one line, I think, sometime 2-3 years ago. That is how they tried to bring this in. But according to the new law, to my understanding, unless somebody else is going to correct me, it will all have to go through competitive tenders.
But all was not hunky-dory with the previous government, because you said everything was a Rolls-Royce process, everything was
that is where we were involved.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, everything was not hunky-dory. So the government which came into power,
you can see how the people voted,
has made that change. Again, when we speak about how the people voted, we saw a resounding victory at the general election with 159 members. Again, at the local council elections, there was a reduction of around 2 million votes for the ruling party as well. What does this reflect as far as the people are concerned on the ground, in your opinion, as far as the country's economy is concerned?
So, when they voted, they were angry. They rejected all traditional political parties. So, now the question is that, they voted on the essence of corruption, right? But my view is that it is not misappropriation that caused Sri Lanka's economic crisis. It is misallocation and mismanagement. And an important part of this whole misallocation is the way the electricity market also works. And we can discuss that later. But my premise is it was not misappropriation like the public is made to believe that it was corruption, but misallocation of resources and mismanagement that did most of the damage.
Right. I want to ask you, Murtaza, are we on the right track? But I'll hold that question as we go along.
I'm hopeful.
Tonight. You're hopeful. we're all hopeful. Thanks a lot, Murtaza Jafferjee. But when you look at the vegetable prices, of course, we are not hopeful. Thank you very much.
That's the nature of vegetables. They're perishable and highly subject to rain.
And even salt.
Yes, we had too much of rain.
Right. Thanks a lot, Murtaza Jafferjee, Chairman of Advocata Institute. I now move my attention towards Vidhura Ralapanawe, energy analyst. Vidhura, 9 months into the job, Dr. Tilak Simbalapitiya resigns as the CEB chairman, citing, "I have many family commitments. They are very capable professionals already in the CEB who will continue the work." What does this decode into?
That's a tough one because you're asking me to read his mind. What I can say is that
I'll give you some context
sure.
just to make it easier for you. We're talking about an 18.3% electricity hike, and his resignation comes in light of that. Is there any connection between his resignation and the impending electricity tariff that is going to come into effect in June? Does that make your job easy?
Yes. I think so 18% hike is what has been requested by CEB. That's definitely not what's going to happen.
That's not what's going to happen.
Definitely not, because we know the process, right? CEB as the utility makes a tariff request, and according to a pre-agreed tariff methodology, and then the regulator, after public consultation and review of the documents and the figures, makes a tariff determination. Right now, already we can see there are a number of errors, and we can go into that detail maybe at a later point of time. That does not justify the 18.5. But let me go back, and yes, there is a relationship between the ex-CB chairman leaving and the tariff, because if you remember, he was the one who actually asked for something like 35% increase, not 18%. Now, initially you mentioned that CB has made a 18.5 billion loss for this quarter, and if you read the CB accounts, there is about 150 billion profit last year. These are not, none of this is correct because it's incorrect accounting standards. Right now, let's go back and let me explain how this happens. CEB is a regulated utility. And what that means is that under the regulatory process, they have what's called allowed revenue. Now, the allowed revenue is their actual expenses that they are projecting, as well as a return on equity that is pre-agreed. CB cannot make more profit than allowed revenue. It cannot make more revenue. So what happened last year, as Murtaza also mentioned earlier, they made a forecast, and they made based on the forecast, tariff was set, and they got significantly more revenue than the allowed revenue. Now, what is it? What is the correct accounting treatment for this? So let me put it in numbers. Last year, CEB's revenue was about 560 billion rupees. When you look at the allowed revenue, that should have been about 500 billion rupees. So there is a 60 billion rupees excess that the consumers has given to CEB, which should not have been given. The correct accounting treatment for this is to treat the 500 billion as the revenue for the year and the 60 billion as advances made by the consumers. Why? Because it's subject to a clawback. Now, if you only book the 500 billion, you don't have a 150 billion profit, and that additional 60 billion as per the tariff methodology is allocated then for 2025, and what happens is this so-called 18.5 billion actually ends up as a profit. Now, where is this concept coming from? This concept is nothing new. If you look at last year's LECO accounts, this is exactly how they have done. How do they do this? Every quarter, they discuss with the PUCSL and agree on what the clawback is based on the tariff methodology. So they look at their revenue and they only book the income that they are due to and keep the balance as a reserve.
Let's make this a little bit less technical so our viewers are able to clearly understand.
Correct.
So I just want to get to the bottom of it. Now, Murtaza said with regard to forecasting, they have not made a mistake because forecasting is not something that you have a crystal ball in front of you and start deciding as to what's going to happen. But I am trying to understand from you, has there been a mistake with regard to forecasting?
Of course. And I don't agree with Murtaza because most of the parameters that is in the CEB forecasting CEB process can be better forecasted. Right? For example, one of the criteria is rainfall. Right? there is sufficient tools to give a fairly accurate rainfall inflow forecast for the CB. It's just that they are not using a proper methodology.
But Vidhura, I just want to understand, because if you look at how things panned out in 2024, I think Murtaza was on the show a couple of times last year as well, and he said good rainfall contributed for the country's economy's revival as well.
Sure.
With regard to energy. So now you're trying to say that rainfall... Agriculture. So I'm just trying to understand from your perspective, what do you mean by rainfall
this can be fairly well forecasted, because and we have climate scientists in this country who are able to do this forecasting. I mean, I have a background in climate science, and even I make better forecasts than CEB actually does.
So 18 billion loss. Who is responsible? Now I know.
No loss.
Yeah, that's not a loss.
It's not a loss because it's bad accounting practice. If you have advance payment and if you book it as an income, you're going to see a profit next year, and you're going to see a loss next year.
Understood. So now I get what you're saying, Vidhura. But what I don't understand is, a few years ago, we saw the manner in which how Mangala Samarvira came up with this formula. It first of all was applied to the fuel price formula in the country, and it somewhat worked very well. Now, there is a formula affecting electricity prices as well. We all are aware, and we saw the manner in which at political fora, where Chanaka went on to say that there was certain individuals from the previous regime was getting somewhat of a leeway, they were being bribed and so on and so forth. Let's leave that aside. But what we know right now is that there is a formula for every 6 months. Now, this has been agreed upon with the IMF. The IMF is well aware as to what the formula is, how things are going to pan out, and what the projections and the forecast is all about. What is the fuss right now with regard to this tariff increase? If this is only an accounting problem, why is it being such a big burden on the people of the country and the business community?
So there are two problems that is currently at play, right? One is a particular claim that IMF has made regarding CEB's tariff increase, right? This is unjustified. It's unjustified based on two reasons, because there is an agreed methodology, there is a law. Whether you're IMF or even the president of the country cannot violate any of those, right? That's a governance issue, number one. Number two is that one of the reasons that we are in this crisis is because a certain amount of misinformation has been provided, not just to IMF but also to the general public. Because we have to remember that IMF directly speaks to the utility. So when they give the wrong information and the incorrect figures, you have a problem. The basis of our tariff methodology is cost reflective tariff. Now, this is not something even IMF disputes on, right? When last year in the books CB was earning 150 billion rupees, right, which is roughly about 22% of their top line as a net profit, people who committed to cost reflective tariff like IMF was not concerned.
They were happy.
Why? If it's cost reflective tariff, how come CB ends up making excess profit? Then it's not cost reflective. So let's agree on what we want, right? Either we want cost reflective tariff or we want super profits for CB. These are not the same.
No, but Vidhura, the agenda before, I want to pick Murtaza's brain on this on the second round. The agenda before was to restructure the CEB.
Right.
And showing profit at that time was important. If this is if it was to be privatized, you have to show that this is profitable for any venture to take and run. So
then you need to get away from the cost reflective tariff, which is the basis that we are running on. Right? Now that is something that neither IMF has ever disputed, because cost reflective tariff is the methodology.
So now who is wrong? Is it the IMF who is wrong, or is it the Public Utilities Commission who has given the data?
Public Utilities Commission has not given the data. The data has been given by CEB, and as I pointed out earlier, unless we fix
but you said that the IMF speaks to the Public Utilities Commission.
IMF speaks to everybody. IMF speaks mostly to the CEB, including CEB union members who go and sit with IMF on a periodic basis. When
Can that happen?
it is happening. It is happening. We know the names. I think we need to get this. Now, one thing that I think...
You're saying this with responsibility.
I am saying this with responsibility. Minister Anil Ranjit made a statement after he came back on Washington. And
Anil
Jayanta, sorry, mistake. And one of the things he said, which is most important, is that there are two differing narratives. There are two different sets of numbers, one coming from CEB, one coming from PUCSL. And this cannot move forward. Right? I think the part of the problem, and why the core problem, is also that we need to have one single narrative. We may have some variation in small numbers, but you can't have this level of variation between one set of narratives and another set of narratives within the conversation.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Vidhura Ralapanawe, energy analyst, for joining us this evening on the show as well. I want now quickly pick Chanaka Wickramasuriya's brain on the crisis that we are facing at present. Chanaka is an energy consultant. Chanaka, are we facing a crisis with regard to electricity prices, energy sector in Sri Lanka? Because we've been speaking about this subject every year. When there is electricity cut for a couple of days, we speak about it. The moment the Keravalipitia power plants don't work, we talk about this. And we always take a very reactive method rather than a proactive approach. Is Sri Lanka going to face an energy crisis in the next few years or even now?
Yeah, no, so let's break that question down into two parts. So first is demystifying the issue with regard to the consumer tariff and the methodology, right? So just to elaborate and perhaps try and make it a bit simpler for your audience to understand, the reason there is a tariff fluctuation is because CEB's forecast fluctuation, right? Its biggest cost element is in the generation cost, and this generation cost fluctuates because of a large amount of hydro versus thermal. So you have a fluctuation of that depending on your monsoonal cycles and intermonsoonal cycles. So therefore your cost element is going to, now we talked about cost reflectivity, so therefore your cost element is going to fluctuate widely over a year. Now this fluctuation is hard to forecast for various reasons. Vidhura says you can forecast it better, but as you know, it's getting harder. Now it's not so much even a monsoonal forecast, but it's an intermonsoonal forecast whether you get that right or wrong. Right? So now ideally you don't want the tariff also to be fluctuating like this, right? Because the businesses will find it difficult to manage and forecast their production costs if this tariff is going to fluctuate widely over a year. Right? So you want to smoothen out the tariff. Now if you smoothen out the tariff and you have your underlying cost variable moving all over the place, you are going to post losses and surpluses. Right? That's a given. Right? So then it's a question of how you show this loss to the public, i.e. the accounting methodology that he was talking of. If you do proper accounting, you're not going to see this massive fluctuation, because when you make profits, you'll show a provision against that, and you'll have less profit. And when you have losses, you'll reverse that provision, and you'll show a more stable profit element. Your cash flows will fluctuate all over the place, right? So that is a question of managing cash flows and having necessary credit lines available to manage when you don't have money and use the surplus money when you have. So you need to demystify this for the public. I think what has happened here is there is a lot of confusion going around and this whole tariff methodology business has got politicized, and the public has got themselves in a twist on this. So this is very simple. So this is the tariff with regard to the future, right? Forecast. How do you manage this tariff? How do you post a tariff today that is reflective of the cost and reflective of the future as well? So that's one. So that is one of the primary concerns of the IMF, that over a cycle, and when I mean by a cycle, typically a 12-month cycle, that the CEB does not post one cycle loss. It may post losses in between. That's okay. That's the nature of the underlying cost structure, right? And the 12-month weather cycle. So as long as the CEB doesn't post a loss over a 12-month calendar year, IMF shouldn't have a problem with this. And
then why is IMF holding a gun to our
So
heads?
I'm coming to that, right? There is a second issue with regard to this, which is a little bit more opaque in my view, which is, does the IMF want past losses recovered? Okay, now you talked of when they made, Vidhura talked of when they made a huge profit of 120 billion or whatever it is, everybody was happy, IMF was happy, etc. Why? Because that brings the debt component down on the CEB's balance sheet, because you made so much money, right? You can pay off some of all that state bank debt, etc. So there is this issue of whether the CEB should be making profit to recover its past losses. Now, stay with me on this. CEB today, as we speak, right, over the last 12 years or so, it has posted losses in 7 of the 12 years, I think, if I recall right, since 2013, right? Actually, what happened was during Gotabaya Rajapaksa's regime in 2014, they didn't do the tariff filing and increase, and all hell broke loose after that, because the CEB just went into the red. CEB was one of the best paymasters up until then. Nobody had an issue with CEB. No IPP, nobody. CEB was a better credit than the government, right? So then what happened is it accumulated losses. How did it finance those losses? It borrowed from the state bank, it borrowed from the treasury, it built up a huge debt component. Come 2022, the government converted all that debt to equity. It did it in progressive. It didn't do it in one go. Over that 12-year period, progressively some of the debt was converted into equity. Today, CEB's balance sheet, as we speak today, the debt to equity ratio, borrowings to equity, is about 45%. The lowest it has been in the last 13 years. So there is no historical loss being carried by the CEB today.
Yeah, so just to understand, again, Chanaka, it's important to decode these numbers a little bit so our viewers are able to clearly understand. So are you trying to say the past losses that were accumulated by the CEB up until 2024 has now been wiped off?
Up till 2024 has been wiped. When I say wiped off, it needs to be clarified. It has been converted to equity, right? So all those losses that showed up in the form of debt are now converted. It's essentially written off.
Yeah. So,
but when you write it off, you have to recapitalize the balance sheet. So basically, to put it very simply, Shamil, what happens is all those losses, which to the tune of, because the recapitalization is to the tune of about 900 billion or a little less than that, right, over the 12 years, right? Where does that 900 billion go? That has all gone back onto the government balance sheet. So that is now housed in the form of the debt stock that the government has issued, or T-bonds and T-bills, just like every other loss that we have incurred in the last 70 years, right? Whether it's losses on SOEs, losses paying for free education, free healthcare, whatever, right? All that government, every loss is parked there. Now, if you want to recover that loss and get that 900 billion back, let's say, perfectly fine, I have no issue with that, but you do it through a taxation, not through the tariff mechanism.
Right. So, for me to understand now, Chanaka, I got her name wrong, but Chanaka Wickramasuriya. Chanaka, just to understand now, why cannot the government or the Public Utilities Commission or the Ceylon Electricity Board understand what you're saying so simply? Because now Vidhura is explaining this.
No, we understood it perfectly. It's 5 minutes from you.
Look, I can't explain why they can't explain this to the powers that be or whoever it needs to be explained to.
I'm quite sure the IMF is not oblivion to the accounting standards.
You see, somebody needs to explain this in simple terms and logical terms. The problem is sometimes people go in and throw in. Honestly, I've been in front of these conversations and it's very convoluted. And honestly, it's a trust factor. The IMF is sitting on this side, our guys are sitting on this side, talking all sorts of things. The IMF is sitting there and trying to decipher what is being said. There is a trust factor issue here as well. So, if you explain this in very simple terms like I tried to do now, right, everybody will be quite okay with this. Now, there is still an issue. If you want to recover this, and let me finish this, if you want to recover these past losses, and Murtaza and I have talked about this, you don't do it through the tariff methodology. If you want to use the utility as a tax collecting mechanism, which like we use the banks, we use the banks as a tax collecting mechanism, right? We use customs like a tax collecting mechanism, right? So if you want to use the utility as a tax collecting mechanism and you send me the bill, Chanaka, this is your tariff related expenses, here's a tax on top of it. right? Which is a cost recovery for whatever it is. That's fine. So then it's completely transparent and very importantly.
But prices are going to go up even.
Yes. No. I'm saying if you want to, because that.
You're making.
No. I don't.
Civilians more difficult.
Wait. Hold on.
Figure out the business.
I agree. I don't agree. I don't think that you should tax electricity. Yeah. That's a different matter. But I'm saying if you want to, then that's how you do it, and then the money goes to the treasury.
Don't even suggest that.
Okay. Okay. Thankfully, I'm not a politician. But that money will then go to the treasury and not to the CEB.
Yeah, understood. Thanks, Chanaka, Wickramasuriya, energy consultant. Let's quickly move to Asoka Abeygunawardana as well, a strategic plan. Asoka, we need some disclosure with regard to your roles now. You were very close to Maithripala Sirisena at one point. What is your role now for the people to understand? Because you were very vocal when Maithripala Sirisena was elected. Are you still with him, or what's your role?
I was with the government. I quit the government. Then I was in the private sector, working in a public listed company. So I couldn't come to these forums.
Yes.
Now I am retired and I'm free to say anything, and I'm here.
Right. Now for us to understand, what is your take? Because I have seen, Asoka, over the years, there have been a tug of war between the CEB management, the CEB Engineers Union, the Public Utilities Commission as well. This is never ending. It's always a problem. We have been having this show since 2015. Every show that we've had, Public Utilities Commission, CEB and the CEB Engineers Union are fighting. Either they can't project the forecast properly, or either they can't proactively take measures to sort out the Sri Lanka's energy crisis. What is really happening? Just tell us what's going on.
Yeah, now before the PUCSL was established, I was in the energy sector. During that time, what was happening is that there's a tariff division within the CEB. They submit their proposal to the government. Government review and make certain reductions and publish it. That's how that happened. It was not transparent. Now, since the establishment of the PUCSL, the process is transparent and visible, and anyone can challenge. Now, there's a process. CEB must submit their proposals, then PUCSL get certain clarifications and open it to the general public. Then they gather their comments and then announce the final one. So it's very transparent. It's not a hidden agenda now. Now the thing is, the dispute, I think I have to make a few corrections here. It's not annual revenue or deficit or the surplus. We are discussing about half yearly. Because
every 6 months.
Yes, every 6 months. Because now we are getting ready for the July to December season period. Now the process has started. Still we are halfway. I mean, it's just 5 months now, 4.5 months. So we don't have a clear picture what has happened during the last 6 months. So we cannot adjust that. Because of that reason, this will be compared not with the first 6 months of 2025, but with the last 6 months of the previous year, 2024. Similarly, this happened during the first 6 months as well. Now, at the initial stage, when in January they were in the process, they were comparing the surplus or the deficit of 2024 January to June. Mm-hmm. Then they came up with the figures that there's a 51 billion surplus. Surplus is advance payment made by the consumers. It's not a profit. It's the advance payment paid by the... Why is that? Because of the issues with the forecast. Now let's come to this year. Now during this first 6 months, they are supposed to be carried forward amount of 51 billion, which is an advance made by the consumers. So if an advance is paid, then from the next bill it will be deducted. That's the basic principle. So based on that principle, the figures ultimately CEB and the PUCSL agreed. There was this 51 billion amount. Okay. Now let's assume they are announcing only the first 3 months figures. Now they say they have a loss of 18 billion. Now if you assume that this 51 is divided among these two quarters equally, so then it should be, the loss should be 25 billion, not 18 billion, because they are not considering that 25 billion into account. If so, the forecast is incorrect because we had more rain. So the profit they gained during these first 3 months is 7 billion. Because 25 billion allocated, they say they have a loss of 18 billion, so the surplus is 7 billion.
But no one is talking about this 7 billion.
Exactly, that's why I'm raising this issue. Now, if you ignore this 25 billion only, you can say that, well, there's a loss of 18 billion. But in actual practice, if you accommodate that, there's a surplus of 7 billion.
So, Asoka, let's get into these nitty-gritties in the second round and to understand these accounting terms also. But I just want to get to the bottom of this. Now, the PUCSL has been established in Sri Lanka since 2002.
Yeah.
There has never been a problem with electricity price hikes. You know why? Because the government who comes into power appoints PUCSL chairman as well. As a result of that, whatever CEB suggests, the PUCSL goes ahead and implements. We've not seen a big problem. We've really seen this issue cropping up when Chanaka Ratnayaka was appointed as a chairman of the PUCSL.
No, it's not true.
It's not true. Okay.
Because right throughout the period, I felt only one instance they had this deviation. Other than that, they were acting as professionals and gentlemen.
So, but professional gentlemen, how much of loss?
No losses. Let me explain.
Yeah.
Let me explain.
So the CB has to make money.
No, let me explain. Now,
no, tell me. No, I want to understand. Now, you're saying the PUCSL has acted as gentlemen. Understood. They can act as
commissioners. I mean,
no, whatever it is. That's subjective. Probably gentlemen.
No,
professionals in your eyes. In my eyes, it may be different. But for me to understand, if the PUSL has done right from the government's perspective to make sure the CEB is profitable, why was the CEB making losses?
CEB is not making losses right now.
Right now.
No, I mean for the during the last 2 years.
No, last 2 years. Forget about last 2 years. Now PUSL has been established since 2002.
No. There was no Electricity Act for they to function. It was happening in 2009.
Yeah, I know. So from 2009 onwards to date, now Chanaka said 150 billion loss. 150 now.
No, can I jump in there? I'll answer that question. So it's a very good question.
Yeah.
No, I mean, let me finish this first. Now, now let me explain the methodology. I think you missed the point. Now, within this methodology, there's the generation cost divided into 2 parts. Running cost, mainly the energy cost, and the capacity cost. Capacity charge is based to recover the capital. So that includes loan repayments plus the return on equity. So that is included in the formula, right? So additional to that, we have the transmission and distribution. If they are getting loans for that, then it's included in the finance cost. It's mentioned as finance cost. So debt repayment, interest payment, everything is included in formula. So based on that total cost, they look at how to recover that. So all those things happen.
I'll ask you one very simple question. Forget about this Electricity Act. Keep that aside. Was the CEB making profits? Forget about the last 2 years. After the Aragale, forget about those few years. Aragale was an exception. Ranil Wickramasuriya came into play. He took a hard decision. As a result of that, there were good decisions taken with regard to the country's revival. As a result of that, we also saw the PUSL chairman going home as a result of impeachment as well. Before that, was the Ceylon Electricity Board making profits?
Yes. Let me explain that how that's happening, right? From the PUCSL point of view,
tell me the year. No,
I'm explaining this.
No, I don't want explanation. I want the year. Tell me the year the CEB was making profit.
Let me explain it. I don't.
No, tell me the year, will you?
Which one?
Year?
Each and every year, the tariff is formulated to recover the cost.
Okay.
If the government won't subsidize, they can give a subsidy.
Right. Okay.
So that subsidy is.
The government has given a subsidy.
Yeah, it's a subsidy given to the sector.
Right. Okay.
If so, then there's no loss.
So that's called mismanagement.
No, nothing to do with mismanagement. If the consumers cannot meet the total cost, if government feels that certain segments should be given a subsidy, they can get from the taxpayers and give that benefit to the ratepayers.
Right, okay, thanks. I'll come back to all this. We'll go for a short commercial break. Let's make it, I'm urging the panelists to make it as less complicated as possible so our viewers are able to clearly understand what you're trying to say. Let's talk less about numbers and let's focus more on the content. Just a request. I know it's a bit of a difficult and a technical subject, but let's stick to that. So we're going for a short commercial break. Tonight, our topic of discussion is revolving around the country's economy as well as the energy sector, with an emphasis on the country's future electricity prices in the country as well. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back.
Design is like music. It's a whole orchestra. The dots, the lines, the dashes. It's a whole symphony. It has to feel good.
Come on a fantastic discovery of design as Anthony Burke meets designers from Mumbai to Yogyakarta, showcasing groundbreaking works.
This is me, this is my creation, this is my life.
Culture by Design.
Saturday at 6 p.m. onwards on TV1.
Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. I want to open the floor for questions from Niresh and Shrihar, but Chanaka, if you can give some clarity on how now Asoka says CEB has been making profits, but I can't see this on paper.
No, Asoka mentioned, I think, he didn't get a chance to fully explain himself, I think. So you asked a very pertinent question, Shami, which was, why did then, therefore, if there is cost-reflective tariff and there is a methodology, why did the CEB make losses? Very good question, right? So what happened was a tariff, cost recovery tariff wasn't filed back in 2013-14. Vidhura can give me the exact dates, right? So now, which means the PUCSL is like, look, guys, tell me what your tariff is, right? Your costs are going up, etc. Tell me what the tariff is and I'll approve it. You're not sending me anything. Right? So you continue to run with your low tariff. Now costs are going up. Rupee is depreciating, oil is going up, etc., etc. So the CEB is making losses. I'm PUCSL saying, give me your tariff. I'll approve it. He's not doing it. Why? Because Gotabaya didn't, President, that were, or even maybe during Mahinda Rajapaksa's time, they didn't want the tariff to go up.
And even running.
So CEB starts making losses. Now what that means is that if the CEB is making losses, the utility is saying, okay, if you're making losses, that's perfectly fine. That means it's an implicit subsidy. That means the government has to pay CEB in some manner or form. And what the government did was, eventually they had to recapitalize, like I just mentioned, but the government just kept loading debt onto that balance sheet through the state banks to cover those losses. And merrily we went along like this. And all hell broke loose when it came to 2021 and 2022. Right, so that's what happened. Now there's a very important point here, because the current act, there is a proviso there that says the regulator has to ensure the financial solvency of the sector. This is a very, very important change that was made, which means now there is a legal onus on the regulator to ensure that none of these things go into losses as well.
Right. So when you say the regulator, is the CEB or is it the PUCSL?
The PUCSL. Right? So now the necessary checks and a little bit more checks and balances have been brought in with this current act.
So I remember, Murtaza, a couple of years ago, you said the government has to bite the bullet and the people also have to bite the bullet, because it's going to be a bitter pill to swallow, but they have to do it. Now, what Chanaka is saying is, it has been difficult. The governments periodically over the years have been subsidizing the electricity prices. Now, what is the way forward? Now, do you think under Kumar Dissanayaka's administration, is on the right track in terms of increasing the electricity tariff? Because we know now this has to go to the PUSL, then the PUSL will get public consultations, and based on that this process will work around and they will come up with a plan to increase electricity tariffs. But we know for a fact the IMF is holding a gun to the government saying the prices have to go up. What's your thought?
So I'll just first make a general comment. You know, when there was a crisis in the country, the people in the Aragalaya shouted, bring the stolen money back. Some of the politicians also jumped on that bandwagon. Unfortunately, there was very little stolen money and more of the money in pockets of people like myself. Right? And I say this.
You had more money, but we didn't.
Yes, even yours. And I say this. If you look at national income in Sri Lanka, the top 10% of households get 36%. The top 20 get 51% of national income, and that top 20% spend 46% of total expenditure. Right? So when you subsidize, etc., it is the wealthy in a society that is benefiting from all of this. And invariably, as Chanaka tried to explain, this all ends up in the debt of the country. Right? So what you are doing is you are giving a subsidy thinking that you are helping the poor who is really consuming very little, but it ends up benefiting the rich. And then you are taking that loss and what we call socializing it. You are putting it the debt. And unfortunately, what is going to happen in Sri Lanka, it's not my generation who enjoyed it who's going to pay. We are going to leave it to a future generation. Right? So that in essence, I'll finish with my general comment.
I need to correct you on something, Murtaza.
In essence, this is not only the electricity sector. This has happened in everywhere. Bigger subsidies were given in diesel and petrol. There was lot of misallocation of resources. Right? So,
I'll come back to Sharon. Just give a.
I just need to correct small thing. Which
I'll come back to you.
No, let him correct.
Correct. Which is, he's absolutely right with regard to socializing of a subsidy that it was enjoyed by everybody, including the rich, when it came to diesel and petrol. But not electricity, because there is a cross subsidy in the consumer tariff. The high-end consumer of electricity,
but that's not correct. That's not correct.
Is paying.
I want to correct that.
That is, he's talking only about the residential segment. But
I'm talking
there
about the
is a big industrial and commercial sector, and there is a significant amount, right? So we are not all going to sit on this table and agree, but since you asked me the question, I am making a general comment. Basically, why in my opening remark, I said the cause of Sri Lanka's crisis is misallocation of resources. And the answer to this whole thing is to have market-based principles in determining prices. Electricity is a price like everything else. Now, I would like to correct some things that my colleague said here, which I don't agree with. So Vidhura said that it's a wrong accounting recognition, which is correct. But the accounting standards do not allow you to do this because it is based on what is called a matching principle and accrual accounting. So in essence, what he's saying is that one period has to be transferred to another period and it's an advance, but you can't account for it like that according to the accounting standards.
No, but accounting standards also about a going concern, right?
No, but this is a revenue recognition. You cannot do that. You cannot do that.
So when you have a going concern principle that is applied,
but in the revenue recognition, because you have
that can be brought forward, no?
No, that's a different thing, because it's not a liability, because the person who's paying for it, he is paying for the service that is. This is in the realms of accounting. Okay, I'll just go through the other thing.
You're experts on this, but in our perspective, just for us to understand, now you have the matching and the accrued principle agreed. However, when a certain organization is a going concern, that can be, if there's a liability, that can be brought forward.
But you see, you are recognizing a revenue. There is a certain accounting standards of revenue recognition. Now, in essence, I don't disagree with the essence of what he says. But what I'm saying is the accounts will never be able to reflect what is going on.
I can give you a classic example now when you...
Can I give you an example? Because it's already done by LECO, and LECO accounts are audited by the Auditor General.
But you cannot do it for the simple reason that you cannot recognize a revenue where you don't know what the advance is, because in a subsequent period, you are basically saying that your actual cost was so much.
Right. So this 18 billion, this 18, just to, again, we are talking a lot of technicalities. So
you have
this
to be
18 billion, is it there or is it just on the books?
See, accounting, there is cash flow and there is accrual accounting. So I would agree with him on cash flow, right? But the way you recognize accounts is slightly different. I'll just go through the other things. The second thing is this legacy debt is actually there. Chanaka, I don't agree. I checked before I came on this. So it's 180 billion and it's there in the IMF staff report, the third review. So they have said 180 billion, of which 110 billion is interest bearing. And when you ask what is this legacy debt, it is basically there are no assets against that 180 billion. There is some liability against which there are assets. Okay.
So then what happened to the 150 billion that the CB made?
No, so that reduced. That reduced. Otherwise, it would have been higher. It would have been higher.
It's a legacy debt in CB.
No, and it was CB. What was taken on the government books is more. That is separate. This is currently what is on the books, which is what the IMF is talking about.
So now the debt is 180 billion.
No, this is legacy. They have other interest-bearing debt also, which is against assets they have. They have power plants and they have invested in infrastructure, etc. The other thing about the tax, you got to understand, you see, electricity, there is no VAT on electricity. In my opinion, it's a flaw. When you have a VAT system, you should put VAT on everything. Because electricity is a form of energy. You have alternate forms of energy. So you can't put VAT on petrol and diesel and not put on electricity. Because then you distort. The whole basis of the market system is relative prices, right? The thing with VAT, it doesn't distort, right? Because anybody who is using it as a cost of production, you basically can use the input and you get the input credit. So if we want to recover these legacy losses, what we should be doing is we should put VAT on electricity, so then you are socializing the debt, you should take it off, so that the underlying tariff is reflective of its cost, which is the basic market principle. And one last thing about, I think what Asoka said about the periods, the way the tariff setting is, it is based on the calendar half to the next year first half. So they won't compare with second half of 2024 with first half because of the season. And you see, there are two monsoons. Why this 6 months business came about is because they are trying to balance with the two monsoons, because it has a big impact on the hydro generation. So basically, you can't look at the last 6 months of last year. You have to look at the first 6 months of 2024 to compare with the first 6 months of this year. And the other thing is that forecasting error, what they said was about the weather, but there was also a forecasting error on prices, because fuel prices in the beginning of 2024, when they set it, was significantly higher, and the world fuel prices all came down. So that also introduced the error and created the profit.
Vidhura, you want to add something to what?
I think the profit of 2024, the high. I mean, if you look at, we are talking about close to 60 billion excess. This profit is again the incorrect word, because if you look at the books, it's 150, but the recovery amount is only 60, right? Bulk of it is actually came in the first 6 months. And that came because of the weather forecasting error that they did in 23 October.
Plus prices.
No, it's not, because they did the pricing on the bad weather forecast, because they basically projected a drought when everybody, including the Met Department, projected.
The fuel price also went into
it went in, but there is no significant deviation on that. If you look at the profit numbers, it was really high, because within 2 months they made 60 billion profit. Now think of it like this: the whole revenue for the year is 600 million. Right? By October they were breaking even. In November, December, 2 months, 60 billion. That was purely because of high rainfall. The reservoirs overflowed, and they didn't have to use any coal or oil. That's the difference. right? So that's a clear forecasting error that we very well knew. If you read the submissions that was given to the PUCSL, including people like us and many other people, they clearly said your weather forecasts are wrong. You do not need to increase a cent. Now what happened in 2024? The tariff correction came in 2024 February, right? Now I will tell you something, because you mentioned something about political appointment of PUCSL commissioners, right? What happened in 2023 October? There was serious IMF pressure to increase the tariff. IMF got involved in violating the tariff methodology, forcing a tariff on CEB, and that tariff increase actually created a major recession. Now there were over 500,000 accounts, people could not pay their bills.
This
and
was in 2023 February?
No, October.
October, yes.
October tariff. Right?
And 300% increase.
Correct. Now you asked about
12 times the for the lower segment.
And there were over 500,000 connections.
So what happened in that process, and this is why it's important to understand what happened, right?
And that was all past loss recovery attempt.
Why is the IMF calling the shots, and why isn't it the government through the regulator taking that decision?
That is part of the problem. Now, see, the IMF has multiple requirements, right? And they are hanging on this short-term issue. Now let me, you asked about the reform, right? There is a new amendments to the Electricity Act already gazetted by the government, right? This will be placed in the order book of the Parliament on Friday this week, right? Lot of the key components that is instrumental and that is critical for the reform to make it long-term sustainable has been reversed through these amendments. Now IMF, who really should be talking about the long-term sustainability of the sector, is mum about the reversal of the reform. But they are hanging on this short-term issue with incorrect numbers and making it a debt as a condition to release the next tranche. This is wrong.
Vidhura, the restructuring of the CEB,
yes,
everybody agrees it is necessary.
Correct.
I've been in this business for 35 years, and I can tell you, about 30 years ago, when I interviewed Anuruddhanatwatta, who was the Minister of Power and Energy at the time, he said the same thing, restructure.
Yes.
But we haven't actually seen any significant restructuring of this mastodon, this dinosaur.
So
it hangs over the heads of everyone in the nation.
100% right.
Because it drags down the state banks, the DPC, and then that also affects Sri Lankan Airlines.
Isn't it the reason, Naresh, why IMF is pressing on this? The same issue, like you should basically have you cannot go for loss making in CEB.
This is correct, and there is no dispute. Even I don't take a position that CEB should be making a loss. I have never taken that position.
But
right?
you seem like you're taking that position.
Why are you saying it? Because this is not a real loss that we are talking about, right? It's a profit. The issue about reform is very simple, right? Every time when the reform has been attempted, it has been blocked and reversed by elements inside the CB, employees inside.
So that is absolutely preposterous, and we all know that is true.
It is true.
For decades, that's what.
So let me tell you what is happening now. Let me tell you what is happening now.
There are 21 million people in this country.
Correct.
And are being held hostage by just a few elements within the CB.
100% right, and that has been the tragedy. The act that has been passed in 2024 June is, no act is perfect, but it is a fairly good act in terms of how it restructures not just the CEB, but it looks at the holistically the sector. Murtaza was talking about markets, energy markets. energy markets are coming in the Act. All of these provisions has been there. Unfortunately, the Act was not fully operational by the time government changed. When the government changed, now again the CEB union is calling the shots. So if you look at the amendments, instead of one CEB, now we are creating 4 CEBs.
Right. So, Chanaka, just to understand now, we saw Dr. Harsha De Silva speaking in Parliament and saying the IMF very well knew that there was a price formula that is supposed to come into effect every 6 months. Why is it that the IMF is trying to change the policy midway through? And why isn't the government taking a stand and saying, guess what? This is what has been agreed upon. We can't make any changes because at the end of the day, we have to take the people's side. That's what Dr. Harsha De Silva said.
So let's take a step back. You asked a question earlier which nobody quite answered, which is this issue with why can't this be done by the government through the regulator? You must remember the regulator is an independent regulator. It is following a due process, a set of formulas, a set of methodologies, etc. It's not a political body, and that's
political appointment.
Political appointments. So therefore,
then that has to be independent as well.
It should be independent.
Constitutional Council.
It should be independent, and it's very important that the regulator acts independently because that sends the right signals for international investors. That's a separate topic and discussion. So it's very important that you have a robust, independent regulator with a clear, transparent framework under which it operates. And the PUCSL has been largely doing that, right? If the government wants to make changes to the pricing, etc., that's a policy decision. And that's a government policy decision that it can do so through policy directives. Now, through taxation, through cross-subsidies within the utility.
It's a bad word.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is...
jitters down my spine.
What I'm saying is that...
No, it's only the rich people who pay taxes.
Right, so that is a policy decision, and that is...
Poor people should not be worried, no?
So that's why I said, so if the government wants as a policy to recover past loans because IMF is breathing down its back, etc., right? There is a mechanism to do that, and that is the taxation mechanism or the subsidy mechanism, whatever it wants to do, right? So to disaggregate those two things. Now, to go back to your question is, why is the IMF pushing to do this? Because IMF wants the government to obviously improve its balance sheet. Now, Murtaza says there is still legacy debt. I don't see this legacy debt because the debt to equity ratio is about 45%, which is acceptable for a utility of this nature, right? So, but if you still want to, IMF is still pushing you to collect historical losses of the CEB, then do that through a taxation mechanism, a VAT like he talked of, right? So it's very clear, it's very simple. IMF doesn't care how this is done. You see, the IMF only wants to make sure that the government's fiscal side is solid. How the government goes about and does it is his problem. That's the political consequences of that the government has to bear.
So Murtaza, now Chanaka is making a bit of sense because now this is an easy way of applying VAT as well, because whoever is using a certain amount of units, that person could be eligible to pay the VAT easily. And why isn't the government resorting to that if that's the case?
So, there's a lot of decisions that governments make that I can't understand. Again, basically VAT became political, right? But I don't know why it is political, because it is the rich people who consume more. So I'll give you a statistic. There is something called the bulk supply, right? Customers who come under bulk supply. 0.2% of all CB consumers account for 48% of consumption, right? Out of something like 7 million or 6 million accounts that they have, something like 20,000 accounts are what you call this bulk supply, which is above a certain kVA amount, right? They account for 48%. Right? So these are basically probably industries, businesses who then can take that as an input credit and pass it on. Now, when you do not charge VAT, you are creating differential prices between, say, if you are going to use a generator or if you are going to use fuel. That is bad tax design. So, ideally, no less a person than the architect of New Zealand's economic miracle basically, Roger Douglas, he said, I put GST on everything, right? But I took all the other distortionary taxes off. Now in Sri Lanka, we have so many different taxes, PAL and cess and all. What we should have is a broad-based VAT where we put VAT on everything basically and take all the other distortions out.
So Murtaza, I was in Canada recently.
Right.
And even the Canadian tax system is so simplified. They have HST right throughout.
GST.
HST, it's called HST. It's right throughout, and everything is on.
So any rational system will do that, because any economy, so any basic economic 101 will say that is the least distortion, because you are not saying electricity has no tax, diesel has tax, kerosene has no tax. Take the protein market, right? Fish has no VAT, but chicken has, eggs has. Now they took it out of liquid milk, no VAT. Powdered milk has VAT. So you know you don't have a level playing field. You are distorting through taxation.
Right. So Asoka, just to understand now, there is a electricity tariff hike that's going to come into effect in June, whether we like it or not.
No, it will not happen.
It will not happen.
Yeah. Because the data is incorrect. Once they rectify, now let's take that example. Now, last year, as he quite rightly pointed out, from July to December, there was a surplus of about 11 billion, I believe, if I am correct. And on top of that, they have added this 8 billion loss in the first 3 months, which is incorrect.
So the PUCSL submission.
Submission, yeah. So submission is one thing. Final determination is a different thing. That's what I'm going to say, because that's incorrect. Then, as soon as you remove that, it reduces from 18 billion to 18% to 14%. Sorry, 18. Now they were requesting an 18% increase. Now it will be reduced to 14% at a glance, because they have incorrectly included two deficits into one is deficit and the other one is surplus. So it's incorrect. So basically, as you remove that, this will be reduced from 18% to 14%. And on top of that,
this will come down to 14%.
Yeah, at a glance you can say that. It's very clear. On top of that, they have estimated an increase in transmission and distribution sectors. Generally, if there's no inflation during that period, there's no reason for that. So I think PUCSL will further investigate that, and then there will be cross checks, and that may be reduced. I'm not sure.
So Asoka, what you say is like this is a issue with the accounting.
No, these are submissions. These are the submissions.
I mean,
they are not using the matching periods.
Right.
No, that's
one thing.
That's one thing. You're right, because see, the tariff submission is incorrect. That's what.
So Vidhura, in your opinion, how much should the tariff be increased?
Max 6% based on my calculation.
My calculation is 4%. Let's see. This will decide. Because this is a transparent process.
And what Asoka and I are doing, I mean, independent accounting. We didn't talk about this before, but what we are doing is we are just reading the tariff submission. There are two documents right now out. One is the tariff submission made by CEB and the PUCSL consultation document. And when you read that, it's very clear. There is 18.5 billion added additionally, which has to be taken out. But Asoka had said about distribution and transmission, there is allowed revenue that is determined by the PUCSL in consultation with CBA beginning of the year. They cannot change it mid-year. So this is incorrectly done. Right. There are a number of charges that are incorrectly done.
So you're saying 6%. You're saying 4%. Chanaka, just to understand 5%. Now, you're saying even less.
No. Not saying any number.
Just to understand, just prior to the elections, Wickramasuriya in Political Forum has said that he is going to reduce electricity by 33%. Do you see this happening?
No, for the simple reason he was talking of bringing electricity down by 30% by bringing the generation costs down, right? And I do not see the ability to do that. You see, what is important though is we need to get now we are moving into sort of the realms of the future, right? Energy transition and where we are heading with regard to our energy sector. Now, it's very important though that we get the right energy generation mix in place, starting to get that procurement process in place today, because otherwise what is going to happen is further down the road, if we don't get this right, we are going to have very high energy costs. And I think that's an area of a topic of discussion that we should have.
But Sri Lanka has always been deemed as a country that energy costs have always been very high.
That's correct.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah,
that is correct.
Because
So that
of
is
the presence of oil-fired power plants mainly, not because of hydro or renewables or coal. It's mainly because of oil-fired power plants. So we have to get rid of that. So how to do it is a long-term generation plan. We have discussed that separately.
Yeah.
Long-term generation plan, if they were formulated in a proper way about 20 years back, nowadays we could have absorbed less expensive indigenous resources like solar in large quantities.
So Vidhura,
Can I give you some context, because your viewers might be getting confused. Hydro generation, which is our natural gift, I did the calculations before I came. It's about 4 rupees a unit, right? Which in their forecast they say it's about 33% to 35% for the next period, the hydro generation. Then you have coal. It is 20 or 25 rupees, I forget. Right? So that gives you what he's saying.
the gap.
Then you have thermal. So I was given a rule of thumb, you take the diesel price and divide by 4 and you will get the rate.
Sure.
So 50 rupees for furnace oil, 60 rupees for diesel, etc.
70.
That's how 70.
30.
So it depends on what the prices are,
But
right?
the power plant is.
So that's for your viewers to get an understanding what we are talking about and how sensitive the hydro is, because this is coming at 4 rupees. So instead of 33%, if it suddenly becomes 40%, there's a huge saving. There's a massive saving because this is coming at such a low price. This is what is going on here.
So we have to put our hands and pray to God.
Yes, I always joke with
But
God
on
is
the
a Sri
other hand-
Lankan basically.
But
because
on the
he's
other
been-
hand, if you are switching to solar, so it's complementary.
But it's not. It's not.
no,
Because
no.
in the document, solar, because it was such a generous tariff, is coming at 29 rupees.
No.
No. You didn't understand the context.
No,
Now,
no. This is wrong.
That's the standardized tariff, right?
No,
So-
that's what.
No,
the
let
total-
me explain. So within that, the main component is the capital, right? So capital, when you compare getting at commercial rates, it's one thing. If it's doing in a different way, it will be the interest rate will be lower. Then the equation will be changed.
So for future,
So anyway, it will be anyway cheaper than even coal in the future.
Right.
So
Give us an example. The Indian solar power project in Sampur, how much is it going to fetch at?
No, that is at a very high, 6 US cents or something. There's a battery storage. But let me explain. The existing solar, which has significantly expanded, that is there in the submission documents, is coming at 29 rupees.
Okay, I
Right?
need to make a correction, right? I'm just using the specific numbers in the PUCSL consultation document. The average price of coal for the 7 months is 21 rupees, right? Average price.
With the fixed cost also?
Yes, because you can't. That's okay. That's the capital.
No,
If you
but
want
that's not the way they do the submission.
No. They have both of it.
Okay.
Now, for the renewables, that is combination of solar, mini hydro, everything, it's also 21, right? Now, the difference, there's a key difference here. All of these renewable sources that we are talking about are rupee tariffs, right? Coal is not rupee tariff. It goes up with rupee depreciation. So sometimes I see a lot of analysts confusing it. Even Sampur, even though it's solar, it is still a dollar tariff, right? So even if you pay a little bit more on a rupee tariff, when you average it across the 20 years, it's actually cheaper. Now, we had the same conversation, Shamir, you remember, when we were talking about this during the Sampur coal power conversation, the argument was 22 rupees for the first 7 years, 15.50 for the next 13 years is hugely expensive, right? It's the same argument you're making now. But now, how much are we paying for those power? 15.50. After the hydro, that is the cheapest. It's more cheaper than coal. The wind power projects that was done. So if you don't differentiate a rupee tariff and a dollar tariff, this is incorrect, because you need to do a levelized cost, taking the rupee depreciation in place. The second argument here, and we are going into procurement, because a lot of misconception on the procurement. There is a collective attack on the rooftop solar. There is a collective attack from the current CEB and the ministry, right? And there's an attack on this feed-in tariff mechanism, right? Where you fast-track a project based on an agreed feed-in tariff, which is revised on a periodic basis, right? On the basis that this is more expensive than a tender, right? This is, in multiple ways, this is a wrong comparison, right? Because the reason why those tariffs are given, now even on countries which has a liberal market, let's take for example India, these feed-in tariffs exist, right? Why? There is a reason for it, because these processes reduce the transaction cost, right? If you try to convert this type of capacity on a tender, CB will not do even 10% of what is on the ground. Right. Now the third one, how do we compare? Now there is a piece about hydro, and I want to get to one comment that Asoka also made. What solar electricity has done to this country is that it has indirectly removed use of oil directly removed use of oil during daytime, because now we have so much solar, we don't need to run oil plants in a generally case during daytime. It has indirectly removed oil from the night peak. How did it do that? Because now there's so much of solar electricity coming. We have 1700 megawatts of rooftop solar. What it's doing is it's reducing the hydro use during daytime. That leftover hydro, now we have enough to run in the night time.
Right. So just a couple of months ago, Vidhura, we had this problem where the CEB said for all individuals who are having rooftop solar to switch off.
Correct.
What was
So this is after the sunny Sunday effect, right? Yeah. About the monkey.
Before we go there, I just want to lay some foundational stuff here. And before Murtaza and Vidhura get into a punching match because over feed-in tariffs and tenders, will take us till tomorrow. See, there are lots of arguments with regard to different technologies, right? And how they should be procured. Do we procure it now? Do we procure it with feed-in tariffs, tenders? Do we go LNG? There are some people talking of nuclear. Some people are lobbying for rooftop on the basis of rupee tariff.
But nuclear is something that should be looked at.
Right, look, listen. So there is lots of different arguments and points of view here, right? The only way to resolve this, Shabi, is if you do what is called, and I'm using a technical term here, which is a security constrained integrated system plan, right? You take this plan and you throw in all these technologies. I'm keeping it simple here, right? You permutate it to different risk scenarios, different technology mixes, different costs associated with those technology mixes, different timelines. You do it's a seemingly complex exercise, but it's not rocket science. It's done in all the other countries of this world. You build this plan, then all of these arguments go away. Why? Because you throw in the numbers, you run the model, and you see what is the best for the next 20 years. And you decide. You want feed-in tariffs to bring in utility scale battery, hybrid battery, and you want a feed-in tariff for that because you want it fast, go ahead, do it. You want to bring in nuclear, fine. If you want to bring in LNG, fine. If LNG is not the right technology, all that modeling will throw that out.
But Vidhura at one point was
no. So I'm just
so much about LNG.
Yeah, right. So all I'm saying is all of these arguments you will hear, right? They'll just be arguing. There'll be shouting matches around the table like this until we do this plan. Now, so the next question you're going to ask me is why hasn't CEB done this plan? CEB has done, they do what they call a generation and expansion plan. They do a separate transmission plan. They send the generation plan to the PUCSL for approval, and you will see the reviews that the PUCSL themselves have done on the plan, and there are a lot of contentious issues that the PUCSL regularly raises about the plan. To put it simply, the plan is suboptimal. They don't integrate it with the transmission plan, and that is very important because transmission is a required component for costing and because renewable offtake, because evacuating the renewable. So you have to integrate these two plans and run econometric models on it with the different technology. Now, until you do this, right, you will just have shouting matches around a table like this, right? And that needs to get done. Now, the problem here is this. In my opinion, we are too late in the game for this. We are too late in the day. Now, the current act calls for the development of such a plan. The amendments say that this will be done in another 1 year, right? In my opinion, it can be done in 6 months, right? And if you don't do that, right, what we are doing now is the problem. The elephant in the room is this. We are going through procurement processes of various technologies today, now as we speak, and signing PPAs.
For 20 years.
For 20 years, that is going to land us in trouble in the next 5 years. Now, you asked me that question at the very beginning. Chanaka, what is going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years? Right? This is what is going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years because we haven't done proper planning and procurement now.
Right. So
I want to just add one thing where I disagree. I'm putting my market cap on because I strongly believe that the success of Sri Lanka is based on the market system. Electricity is not operating on a pure market system, and I'll explain that to you. You see, electricity by its nature is instantaneous energy at a particular time, right? 1 unit of electricity is not substitutable for this moment with 1 minute later unless you can store. Therefore, basically storage is very costly. Now, what we are doing is we are exposing all the consumers to a highly smoothened tariff. But that is not the underlying economics of the whole market that is operating there. Because during the day, the demand varies. And you can't get solar in the evening. If a cloud comes, it differs. Different parts of Sri Lanka, you have different solar energy.
No, but
so you can basically
comes into play, right?
And I must tell you, I must declare my interest that I am an investor in renewable energy. I have quite a bit of investment. I will explain this thing. We sit on a table like this and disagree, but I have a very strong view basically that you cannot compare solar with other forms of energy where the source of energy is stored and you can turn it on. So you have to bring in the economics of availability. The problem with solar is that you can't switch it on and switch off when you need it basically. You have to take it when the sun is shining.
Yeah, but there are other solutions. Solutions
so
for that. So if you are unaware of how to handle the variable renewables, you cannot discuss this in market terms. There are solutions. There are solutions. There are cheaper solutions.
Yes, but without knowing that, you cannot comment on this.
I
know that. I told you, I declare my interest that I'm an investor.
It's not interest.
You don't have the broad picture to answer.
You don't understand.
I do. That's what you have. That's what you assume.
Now let's take.
That's what you stated, Murtaza.
No, I did. I simply said the nature of electricity is basically instantaneous. Now, if you want to remove the instantaneously, you need to store. Right?
Storing is important now.
Sorry. So
yes,
let
it's
me
going to cost you significantly more.
No.
Why significant? Who says significant?
So what about
What is the tariff? What is the
cost to store down?
What about the battery cost?
Hold on. Let me give you the number. Right? In the global markets, a solar farm, if you take the tariff of a solar system, if you add a 4-hour storage to that, the typical increase of the cost is between 1 to 2 cents per kilowatt hour.
1 to 2 cent dollar.
Right? Now, what is it that we are comparing against? We are comparing against coal. We are comparing against oil. Now, what is that? What is the price of oil? We just signed a new power purchase agreement.
Are you saying to store a unit of electricity only costs 1 US cents?
Okay, you did not understand. What time you're talking about solar. Now I'm comparing.
No, I also understood. I also understood.
So let's explain.
Yeah.
A solar tariff plus the difference between a solar tariff and a solar plus storage tariff is between 1 to 2 cents, right?
No way.
So
The difference.
it's not in no way. I'll give you the report from Berkeley Labs. Is that okay for you?
Please do.
Right?
I would be the happiest person because I'm trying to
Be
invest in this.
very
And
happy.
if you can,
Be very happy, and we are talking about utility storage.
But
right?
you know, how come? Right. Okay. Right. Good.
What is
Well,
the?
good.
I'll give you a good example. Right?
Give me, no,
I'll give you a good example.
Let's put
Please.
into perspective and context.
Please,
Okay.
please,
Solar
hold on.
power project in Sampur now, which has
Yes.
been invested by India.
Yeah.
Is there a storage facility?
It is there. It's very minimal storage. That's for ramping. That is not what we are talking
my
about.
point is, India is one of the countries in the world who has mastered this game of solar.
Correct.
They have.
And why don't we have storage in this? Because CB never asked for it.
Yeah, but so CB has not asked for it,
Yeah, of course they didn't ask for it.
or else it would be just 1 to 2.
Okay, now you asked about the monkey problem. Let me answer this monkey problem and your sunny problem, right? At this point of time, if we follow the CB's own approved generation plan, last year they should have put, I think 50 megawatts of BESS.
Battery. Yes.
Right? This year they should have put 100 megawatts of battery. Now if those storage systems are there is no sunny problem. Right? This is in the approved CB generation plan.
So they didn't do that.
They didn't do that. They have not even done a tender. By next year they should have another
So
200
what is the
megawatts.
assurance that there won't be another monkey problem in the future?
No, monkey problem is a different story. Let me talk about monkey problem now. Monkey problem and the sunny problem is not related. Okay? There are 4 specific reasons, and you can see them in the CB's own report, 4 specific reasons that contributed to the blackout. Number 1, transmission protection system failure, right? Because a 33 kilowatt line fault ended up in the 220 kilowatt line. That is like you having a small short in your house and the substation in your area goes down. That is bad protection system. The hydro system governors are not working. So when a system deficit comes, the hydro systems are the ones that are supposed to be doing the frequency control and ramp up to cover the deficit. This did not work.
So basically hydropower should get reduced.
So if there is
the supply should reduce, right?
If there is a reduction in supply, hydro is kept as the balancing. So it has to ramp up. If there is
But on that day, the rooftop solar power went up, right?
That's a different.
No. It's not related. So even if you read the CB's own report, there is no pointing of fingers to CB. Now media spokesman goes and sells bullshit, but that's not in the report.
Right.
Third one, there is
because now we need to have monkeys to the government has to do statistics and all that.
Let me simplify. Like Chanaka,
Yeah.
I'll give you a simplified answer.
No.
The system has not been developed.
I just want to understand this now. You said 0.01 cents.
1 cent.
1 cent.
1
1 to
cent.
2 cents is the difference between. So there are
No. I just
I'm giving
want
you
to
2
understand.
numbers.
No, yeah.
2 numbers,
Yeah.
right?
So what is tell me how much are you saying? Is it 1 cent or?
If you contract a solar standalone plant,
So 1
right.
cent will
Listen to me.
convert into
1 cent is 3 rupees.
3 rupees, 2 rupees and 94 cents. So are you trying to tell me to store a unit of solar is only costing 2 rupees and 94 cents?
Okay, the answer is little bit complex, but let me say this way.
No, because I want to understand.
Shami, okay, I'll give you.
Because I don't think it's so.
I
think it's more expensive than that.
I will give it to you in a way that is simplified. Now, let's say we are contracting a large-scale solar farm, right? We are agreeing on a PPA after a tender, right?
How many units are we talking about? Let's
say 50 megawatts.
Put numbers.
Let's say we are doing 100 megawatt.
100 megawatts. So how many units are we talking about?
Shamir, shall I give you the...
Right.
There was a leaked cabinet paper that was in the public domain, right? The CB was suggesting storage. For the roof, there's a lot of controversy. They have reduced to 15 rupees.
Right.
They suggested for the battery, the tariff was 48 rupees.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was also.
No, but
Yes.
that is a domestic
That is
battery.
domestic.
It's not 3
Yes.
rupees.
That is a
That is behind the meter.
domestic. That is a domestic. These
No,
things are
these
at
are-
scale.
these are at scale.
Can I give you the statistic right now?
No, let's put two
No,
numbers.
no,
first.
you are not
let's put
comparing.
numbers.
You-
Okay, let's put
you
numbers. Okay,
cannot
a farm has
compare.
100 megawatts. How much of money for storage?
No, now you are talking about capital cost versus
No,
tariff.
additional.
Yeah, additional,
You
yeah.
can say what is the storage cost per
Cost,
unit
yeah,
of
per unit.
electricity?
That is what I gave you. If you
1
have
cent?
No.
shall I give you the numbers?
Okay, I'll give you a minute to look at that and get back to me. Murtaza, now you come from a corporate background as well. We know your family is involved in exports and all that. Energy consistency is very important. Right now, I'm in a board of directors in one of the private organizations, and when we have meetings every quarter, one of the biggest concerns that we have is doing energy audits. So how important is it for the prices of electricity to be consistent? Because when it comes to budgets, when it comes to forecasting, private sector companies can't go at a loss. Because if you look at it, now Trump has come with a big tariff package for most of the countries, and Sri Lanka is also going to face the brunt one way or the other. So the government sector has to be prudent and competitive if they are to sell to those countries. How important is it to have energy consistency when it comes to prices?
So the fundamental of the market system, Shamir, is that prices reflect scarcity value, right? So if electricity is scarce resource, not necessarily because we are poorly endowed, but because we have a dysfunctional electricity system in Sri Lanka, prices are going to be high. Now, it is really ridiculous to try to sell the electricity below its cost. Now, the fact that our costs are high, you have to attack the problem by this so-called, what Niresh called restructuring, unbundling, bringing in competition, efficiency, changing the source of generation, etc. But the worst thing for us to do is to try to say that we are going to give consistency in electricity prices or stability and try to create stability where the underlying does not have stability. You know, you are creating a mirage. So you might as well expose our business people to the reality so that there is enough political pressure and pressure from society to change the system, to make it sustainable. Right? And therefore, when you have high prices, you become efficient because you don't waste. Now, you have a lot of old appliances, old motors, etc. The incentives to change those things are not there if you keep prices low. And that is what happened in that period 2014 to 2022. There was very, very limited effort in trying to improve energy efficiency. Now that the tariffs went up, people's behavior is all different.
I can see grin on Vidhura's face, by the way. So Vidhura, tell me.
So maybe he may be agreeing with me or not agreeing with me.
I don't know. Let's hear what he has to say.
This is the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab of US.
$1 per
Added cost of battery storage, $10 per megawatt hour. That's 1 cent per kilowatt hour.
And where have they done this project?
This is actual comparison between, in US, actual comparison between solar only contracts and solar plus storage contracts. I'll send you the reference.
Right. Okay. Now, just to understand reform, let's talk to the three of you on reforms, and I want to wrap up your thoughts as well as to the topic that we're discussing. For Murtaza, I have a different set of questions, unfortunately, but because of the fortunately or unfortunately,
you're going to talk about carrots.
But I want to talk to the three of you with regard to reforms, the importance of having reforms in the system. So let's start off with Asoka Abeygunawardana in terms of reforms. How important are reforms for the energy sector in Sri Lanka, especially electricity?
Is it the final round?
Yes, the final.
Yeah, okay. Let me conclude by saying reforms is a must because CEB has failed to provide a better picture and to sustain the sector, and they are committing a not existent loss at present. So it has become a chaos now because definitely these seasons are not loss making. So they are erroneously saying that this is loss making. So that itself give the indication that we have to go for the reform. But in order to do the reform, first thing we have to do is to strengthen the regulator. Unfortunately, what is happening right now is to weaken the regulator and get the political intervention on top of that. That's exactly what's happening with this act. Because regulator was doing a fair job and they are obstructing it, citing that IMF is putting conditions, which is not the case. So first thing is restructuring should happen. For that purpose, to facilitate that, we should have a proper regulation. But unfortunately, government is going in the wrong direction. Secondly,
government is going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, but they are coming up with amendments which weakens the regulator. That's what happened because they were saying that we cannot get the IMF next installment because regulator is doing something wrong. And they wanted to get that hold so that government political intervention can do it in a better way, which is incorrect. Because they don't understand.
Yeah, but this government won't do that.
They are doing it now with the amended act. Now it's on the table. It gives power to the.
But they were not given a mandate to do that.
So that's up to the voters to decide that what's happening.
Once you give the mandate,
let me finish that this final round. So that's first thing. Secondly, long-term generation expansion plan plus the long-term transmission plan should be integrated to a single plan, and then only we can see in the next 50 years what's going to happen and what are the current prices and what are the prices, the trends for the future. So, long-term generation plan submitted by the PUCS, submitted to the PUCSL by the CEB, it's not in line with the real situation which originally happened for the last 30 years also. And there's no transmission plan submitted by the CEB to the regulator since 2018, I believe. Yes,
correct.
So, integrating transmission to generation is very important because the future of energy sector in the world is 3D. First thing is decentralization, meaning that every consumer is becoming a prosumer, meaning that all of us will be generating energy rather than getting energy from oil well or a coal mine and have a central plant, 1000 megawatts one spot, distributing it among the... No, it's not the future. Future is renewables scattered, and each and every consumer will be becoming a prosumer. He will be producing, and excess he can sell to the bulk consumers who cannot have the required amount on their own. So first D is decentralization. The second one is digitalization. Smart grid is essential. Without a smart grid, the decentralization won't fulfill. And thirdly, it's direct current. So 3D principle is the future. We should achieve that by 2050. It's all agreed. I mean, as a tropical country, we can achieve that by 2040 if you have a proper strategic plan. So to that extent, I think we don't need to worry about the urgent matter because only solution at present is to go for renewables, mainly solar. So we have to accommodate that. There should have been a pump storage power plant by now, depending on the 2015 long-term generation plan. There should be a up and running pump storage power plant by now in 2025. That has not happened. Now they are discussing about 2035, I think, right? So they have postponed it for 10 years. But there are other ways of doing that. Now we have the Victoria and Randanigala. We can consider those as ponds, and we can easily convert without an environmental and social issues. We can do it in few years. We don't need 10 years to do that. So we have to fast track. This is the least cost option of storing, because that will survive for more than 100 years. Why we are getting benefit at 4 rupees per unit for hydro? Why? Because it's over 60 years now. We have no capital repayment issue. So that's why it's cheap. So
what is the point of transforming those into ponds?
Exactly, to absorb. No, I mean, ponds means now pump storage means pump storage. Now we have to pump from the lower pond to the upper pond. So it's that stores energy in the form of water. That's the principle. So that was the cheapest one. We have huge potential for that. On top of that, we have to see how the battery storage costs are reducing. The trend we have to see. It's reducing at a terrific rate. I mean, that's how, when we were discussing about solar about 15 years back, it was about 100 rupees per unit. Now we are discussing about 20 to 30 rupees or less than 10, 20 rupees as per the CEB announced the tariff, new tariff. So, further reducing. So we have to consider the trends without considering trends for another 50 years. Because once you commission the final one in another 20 years, it will operate for another 30 years. So we have to look at the future, and based on that, short-term solution and the long-term solution are the same.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Asoka Abeygunawardana. I now move my attention towards Chanaka Wickramasuriya. Chanaka, I also want you to touch a little bit about the excise duty, the duty that has been slapped on electric cars up to 30%. How do you view all this? Or we can ask probably.
I will defer that to Murtaza.
So reforms.
Yeah. So look, on the reforms, let's take a step back. There were largely two objectives of the CEB reform process, the restructuring, right? One is that the CEB historically was a big black box. It was opaque. Nobody knew what was going on inside. And there was a lot of inefficiencies, arguably even, vested interests. I don't know. You can use the various words you want, right? So the first step that was required was to build out, was to create greater transparency and accountability across that entity. So that is why it was to be unbundled, right? So that was the first step. The second objective and step of reforms is, once it has been unbundled, you start creating greater efficiencies and start creating the market principles. You are able to bring in the market principles that Murtaza was referring to. You separate distribution companies, you get them to compete against each other, all that kind of demand side management stuff, all of that can be brought in once you unbundle. So that was the broad objective of this. Now, the current amendments arguably start to compromise that a little bit, right? Because it falls short of the original unbundling plan, and it reduces the number of entities that were going to be created, and there is some sort of reversal of what that process was. With regard to the infringement on the regulatory independence that Asoka was referring to, it was actually just one clause in the amendments that say that the tariff setting should be in consultation with the Ministry of Finance, which arguably takes away a little bit of that independence, right? So now you can work on the semantics of this, but law is also all about semantics sometimes. So if you have a phrase like in consultation with the Ministry of Finance, that almost takes away that independence of the regulator. Okay, so this is the issue that Asoka was referring to. So those are the danger of these amendments, if at all. So A, that you're compromising on the original unbundling and the structure that you envisaged, and B, that you're infringing upon the independence of the regulator. So these amendments, I don't know, they are now gazetted and have to go to Parliament for approval. But those are the two contentious issues with regard to the amendments.
Right.
No, that won't.
Vidhura, yes.
Can I just clarify that, Chanaka, unbundling is not privatization. It is
Unbundling is not privatization.
It is
separating the
huge entity into more manageable.
Not so much even more management. It is in order to create the transparency associated with the interactions and the intertransactions between those entities.
Strategic business units.
Right. So you will see exactly how much the whole plant is costing you. You will see exactly how much the thermal plants are costing.
This term
you will see what the
misunderstood by many.
Right. So that it is to first create the transparency.
Yeah. Can I just add 2 points to that? And one of the things is that what CEB is currently doing is covering up quite a lot of failures and inefficiencies through other divisions. Right. If you look at it right now, Karanithissa plant, which has been broken for many years, is now also going through some inspection because they've actually welded the rotor. Now these are very high speed turning rotors, you can't weld them. right? Because they broke it to hide it, they welded it, now it's gone broken, right? So that type of stuff, nobody even knows it because it's all hidden, right? So these type of, that's what he's talking about, this opaqueness, and that contributes to the massive cost that we are having, because we are paying for maintenance and staff and all of that for assets that are actually not functional. There is another problem that we have, because systematically we have underfunded our distribution and transmission distribution networks, except for LECO, and LECO was able to fund themselves because they were independent. Now, because this was state entities, all the funding that came into it primarily came from JICA and ADB. The current reality is to whatever pathway we go, whether we go renewables or any other source, we have to do significant investment on distribution, transmission, generation, all three sources, including what will be government owned. We don't have that open tap from JICA and ADB anymore, right? So we have a serious question: how do we augment our transmission lines? How do we improve our distribution? And to answer the monkey problem, how do we strengthen our grid? As long as we keep all these entities under state control, the capital expenditure of this has to come from borrowings from DFRs or in the market by the government. So part of the unbundling was to create conditions where private equity and private capital in any of its forms can come into this sector, right? And that could be partial divestment, it could be privatization, it could be simple listing of the stock exchange, it could be raising bonds in the stock. So there are multiple mechanisms. What the current amendments do is to try to keep as much of these entities under state control like mini CEBs. That's the best way to describe it. Now that defeats the purpose, because you are not going to be able to raise funds. Now if you think about ADB and JICA and now even World Bank, they are not able to give as much money as long as we are in the IMF program, because it just changes the, Murtaza will explain this better than me. And even the funding they have earmarked for Sri Lanka, only a small portion can come to the electricity sector. Previously we asked, they give. This is not a problem, and that is part of the reason why we have a financial crisis, because we went and borrowed for all the type of unnecessary stuff as opposed to improving what is needed in the grid.
Very quickly, we have a question also. I just want to touch on this. When LECO pays cash for excess solar energy supplied by rooftop owners, why does the CEB not pay suppliers but carry forward excess electricity?
Sorry, say that again.
When LECO pays cash for excess solar energy supplied by rooftop owners, why does the CEB not pay suppliers but carries forward excess electricity?
They are also,
two different mechanisms, net metering and net plus.
Yeah.
And
No,
net
I
accounting.
think the question is, it's in the submissions, in the annexure. LECO is complaining that they have paid the subsidy to the solar provider, but they haven't got compensated by CEB.
The different one.
And that is accumulating. It is there in the annexure in their proceedings.
Okay, I have.
Right.
So that's a different matter.
Yeah. So, Vidhura, wrap up.
So I think the key part about it is that with whatever we do, we need significant investment. Now, if we get the reform structures wrong, and if we are unable to attract capital to upgrade and augment our systems, we will compromise our energy security, we will have blackouts, and we will not be able to provide the correct type of quality and power to the public. So this reform is, some people think that reform is to break the CEB because somebody is angry with the CEB. It's not true. Without this reform and without getting that capital into the system, we cannot move forward. I just want
Is there political will?
I think my worry is that I don't know whether it's government or certain officials in the government who seems to be dancing to the tune of the CB union, and this is unfortunate. Let me just add one point to what Asoka said about the regulator. Right now, President has said it and everybody else is saying we need large investment, we need direct foreign investment, we need foreign investors to come and invest in our power sector in generation, transmission, distribution, everything. This will only work if there is a strong independent regulator only, because the regulator is the one who ensures fairness of the system. Now, if we are going to compromise the regulator by messing up the unbundling or compromise it by taking away their independence by putting finance ministry's ability to influence that, we are not going to get the type of investors who rely on good systems to come and invest. We will have investors, but they are not the same category.
Right. Thanks, Lord Vidhura. So, Murtaza, you're under the hammer now. I'm just kidding.
Used to
Don't ask about carrots.
Used to it, yes. Now, I just want to understand. First of all, tell me about the duty slapped on electric cars. Is that justifiable? 15% to 30%?
So, there is no question of justification, because the taxation of vehicles is not based on the merits of whether you want electric cars versus internal combustion engines. It's about revenue, because cars are not a harmful product, but the rate of taxation,
It is
I mean, in an economic sense, it's not a harmful good, right? You can argue that traffic is harmful, pollution is harmful, but ownership of a car is not a harmful good. It's not harmful, it's not like alcohol or tobacco, which requires a corrective tax, right? So the way we have taxed vehicles is purely to raise revenue. There is no economic rationale to charge 150% tariffs, 200% tariffs. But as you know, I have been preparing vehicle registration statistics, and this morning one of my analysts pointed out that there is a Rolls-Royce Phantom 2 on Ickman for 500 million rupees. So somebody has imported a car and is trying to sell it for 500 million rupees basically. And already in the course of 4 to 5 months, we have seen 5 Rolls-Royces being imported, a few Bentleys, highly expensive cars. So as a revenue measure, it seems to have been very successful, because there seems to be some people with a lot of money who are driven by their ego and are willing to pay. And I say, please encourage them, because we need the taxes, right? So, as I said, that the taxation of vehicles does not follow any rational basis, but it's a revenue measure.
Right.
I would like to just say 2 things.
I have questions.
Yes, I want to.
You can wrap up, but I just want to get some context to these questions. Now, I want to talk about inflation rate. Now it's on a single digit, but when you go to the market, negative. So when you go to the market, it's crazy. The prices are so exorbitantly priced. I'm just wondering how the innocent civilians are eating in this country with negative inflation and the prices of vegetables, prices of groceries going up significantly over the months. It seems that they're cooking up the books again.
So I'm afraid I don't agree with you, because
have you
not
gone
only
shopping recently?
actually, well, I did one better than that. That, as you know, my day job is in the capital markets, and I get an opportunity to speak to a large number of companies, including supermarket companies, and they will concur that over the last 12 months, if you compare 12 months, something like 50 to 20% of the recommended retail prices have come down. Right? So that is explaining the deflationary, but most of the contribution to the deflation came from energy prices, especially electricity prices, because the base 12 months ago was a much higher price, and that is why we are seeing deflation. So it is, the thing is that this indices negative is not an indication of collapsed demand, which is very dangerous, which happened in places like Japan. But it is the supply side that, because these are administered prices, they are pulling the whole weightage down. But towards the second half of the year, clearly, if there is a revision of these prices, etc., that you are going to go back to the targeted inflation level of 5%.
Right. My next question to you is, Murtaza. You came on the show in 2019, Murtaza, and you on the show, not on this studio, on our other studio, you made this famous statement: our economy is in the ICU.
That's in 2020.
Yeah. So is our economy still in the ICU?
No. We have come past that. The question is that, as I said, that we have recovered, But if you ask the question, are we basically running at what we should be running? Unfortunately not. That we are now recovered, but we need to change the system, the way the system works, basically, so that our full potential as our 22 million people will come out. You got to do the reform at the micro level. Now the reform at the macro level was done, stabilizing the exchange rate, stabilizing prices, stabilizing interest rates, stabilizing the fiscal side. But say electricity sector is micro reform, trade, energy markets, transportation market, all those reforms which are much harder, and I have quoted this number of times because 30 years ago I was a student in Australia. The Productivity Commission, they created all the micro reform that created the wonder from down under. I got criticized a lot saying that the Sri Lankan dream is to migrate to Australia, but the reality is that almost everybody we know wants to go to Australia, or already gone basically. They are obviously doing certain things right. And one of the things that they did was not only the macro reforms that they did in the 1980s, but they did a lot of micro reform to get an electricity sector. If you are talking about electricity, that is one country that you should study, because that is a highly market-based system. But difficult because you need a lot more skill to regulate.
One more question, Murtaza. Now, I was not on the show, but one of your colleagues, Dharanath Fernando, came on the show and said the government is taking a very defensive approach. They are not either playing the ball, they are not even scoring runs, but at the end of the day, if it goes like this, we are going to be in the losing side. This is a very serious statement. I think this is in the blood of the Advocata Institute, because you all have a lot of metaphors explaining about the country's economy. Where do we really stand?
So Dharanath, who you are referring to, is a very talented communicator, and he has the ability to use metaphors and analogies to explain. But I think he is accurate there, that they are not doing any harm basically. But the question is that, as I said, of the four sectors in the economy, the external sector, the monetary sector, the fiscal sector is in good hands. The growth, we are recovering. If you are going to accelerate economic growth from the base case of 3% to 4% or 5%, which we will need so that the economy grows faster than the rate at which the debt is growing, you will need to do all this reform. You cannot be welded down by ideology, right? So we have to do pragmatism, and we have to do pragmatic reform and things that will change the rules of the game. So I would like to say a few things. Do you have anything, Dinesh?
Yes, I think on that cricket analogy, if I may add, we first have to decide whether we are playing a test match, an ODI or a T20 before we decide whether...
We are playing a test match. We have to build for the long term.
2028, we will default again.
No. I said if we don't increase the rate of growth of the economy, it's a simple thing.
In your opening statement, you said
yes,
the rate that we are going right now, we may default again.
No, if we don't make the changes to accelerate, because the base case is about 3% growth, no, in my opinion, that's not going to be enough. Because since 2016-17, we have been talking about rainfall, we haven't had a drought. If a drought comes, match over basically, quite literally. So I would like to just say a few more things, just to say, coming back to my market system, that I'm a strong believer in the market. Now, I did a lot of homework before I came. Now, Asoka talked about storage. I do believe that they are working on this, and they are going to build some new reservoirs. Apparently, the existing reservoirs are not suitable, and they are hoping to move forward with the LNG. But I would like to say something else about the importance of prices, right? And this is where I would critique whoever, whether it's a CEB or the regulator, our tariff structure. This is called our tariff structure. Who pays what? Is the most contorted tariff structure I have ever seen. Industry pays 12 rupees if you are buying at the high voltage level, right? You are paying 4 US cents. In India, the industrial power is 8 US cents. In the United States, it's 8. In China, it's 8. In Sri Lanka, it's 4. If you are a commercial subscriber, you are paying 11 US cents. So my argument as a businessman is why are you telling one business you are paying 4 or 12 rupees and another person you are paying 33 rupees, and if you are a hotel, so look at the distortion. If you have a restaurant that is inside a hotel, the restaurant's cost of power is 12 rupees, 13 rupees, right? If you are a restaurant located outside a hotel, your cost of power is 33 rupees. I mean, why do we have this distorted system that there should be simple tariff? Electricity is electricity, and there should be one business tariff and it should be the same tariff. You can't give some people lower the cost of electricity and some people significantly higher. To me, that is the essence of lot of arguments I make, that there is distortion through the tax system, distortion through the electricity system, and that we should have simple prices.
Right. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening on the show. Murtaza, Jafferjee, Chairman of Advocata Institute. Vidhura, do you want to add anything, Vidhura? Very quickly, I'll give you a few seconds.
that tariff, I don't buy into that tariff argument, because in every country there is differentiated tariffs. It's not, I mean, we spoke about India. India has differentiated tariff. Industrial tariff is
example.
Yeah. But that's how every country, because even if you go to Germany, industrial tariffs are subsidized. It's not the same as the commercial tariff. So what we are talking about is not a unique situation. This is not a unique situation to Sri Lanka. That's the simple.
If you want to add something to that, I can give you an opportunity.
I mean, it's obvious.
But we are going to stop at
because
that.
this is like a free market fundamentalism. It's like a flat tax type of a story. This is wrong.
Respond and then we stop it there.
If he says that industry is subsidized, my question is, today what is industry?
Right.
The hottest industry is artificial intelligence. According to our tariff system, that is not industry.
Right. Okay. Thanks a lot, Murtaza. Thank you very much, Dr. Vidhura Ralapanawe, for joining us this evening on the show, and also Chanaka, Wickramasuriya. Chanaka, I'm very sorry for getting your name wrong right at the start. Profusely apologize for that. Thank you very much, Asoka, Abeygunawardana, for joining us this evening. Thank you very much, Niresh. Thank you very much, Shreya. Who made the bid for this 500 million Rolls Royce? You? Yes.
Isn't it your car?
It's an offer. It's an offer. No bids yet.
No bids yet. Right. So we'll leave you tonight with the quote, as I always do. We have to start grounding our policies in facts and recognize that a strong economy is critical for funding progressive priorities. Is it energy that we're looking at? Time to ponder. Take care and good night.